The last night. The garden was quiet. Not the peaceful kind. Not moonlight and soft wind through olive leaves. The quiet that comes before something enormous. The quiet that has weight. The quiet that animals feel before an earthquake and humans feel too late. For a little while, before the soldiers and the torches and the kiss that changed everything, there were only 4 men standing among the ancient trees of Gethsemane. They had walked from the upper room in silence. 13 men moving through the dark streets of Jerusalem, none of them speaking. The Passover meal still sat in their bodies, the bread broken, the wine poured, the strange words Jesus had spoken over both. This is my body. This is my blood. Nobody asked what it meant. But everybody felt it settle into them like a stone dropped into still water. Peter walked close behind Jesus as they crossed the Kidron Valley. Close enough to hear him breathe. Close enough to watch his face. Something was different tonight. He couldn't name it. He only knew that whatever Jesus was carrying, it was heavier than anything Peter had seen him carry before. They entered the garden. The olive trees there were ancient trunks split and twisted from centuries of wind, bark worn smooth in places by generations of hands reaching for the same branches. The ground was soft. The air smelled of earth and night. Jesus stopped. He looked at the group. Sit here while I go and pray. Then his eyes moved to 3 faces. Peter, James, John. Come with me. They walked deeper until Jerusalem was only a faint glow between the trees. Then Jesus stopped again. And Peter saw his face. He had seen Jesus angry in the temple, overturning tables, his voice filling the courtyard like a crack of thunder. He had seen him tired, sleeping on the floor of a boat while waves broke over the sides. He had seen him calm in situations that made other men come apart entirely. He had never seen this. Jesus was shaking. Not dramatically. Not falling. Just a small, involuntary trembling that had reached his hands. The trembling of a man holding something too large and feeling it anyway. My soul is overwhelmed with sorrow. His voice was quiet. Almost a whisper. To the point of death. Peter felt something cold move through him. Stay here, Jesus said. Stay awake with me. He walked away into the dark between the trees. Peter sat against one of the ancient trunks and told himself he would not sleep. Of course he wouldn't sleep. He was Peter. The rock. The one who had stepped out of a boat onto open water. The one who had sworn, only hours earlier at that same table, that he would follow this man into death if it came to that. He would stay awake. He would keep watch. He would be what he believed himself to be. The ground was soft. The night air was cool. The wine from supper moved slowly through his blood. He closed his eyes for one moment. Sleep came like a hand pressing gently on his chest. Not far away, Jesus was on the ground, not kneeling with hands raised in the posture of prayer. Face down in the dirt. Fingers pressed into the soil so hard that the earth packed into the lines of his palms. Father. The word barely made it out of him. If it is possible, let this cup pass from me. The garden gave no answer. The trees stood the way trees always stand, patient, silent, witnesses to everything and commentators on nothing. He stayed there. and the fear that moved through him was real. This is the part people forget, or soften, or explain away because it doesn't fit the version of the story they were given. But it was real, the fear in his hands and his chest and the pit of his stomach, the kind that cannot be argued with, the kind that arrives when the thing approaching is so large that the only honest response is to feel it completely. He prayed again. The same words. The same silence. A third time. Same question. Same silence. And somewhere in the third prayer something shifted. Not the answer had never changed, and he had known the answer since before any of this began. But the way he was holding it. The way a man who has been fighting a weight eventually stops fighting and simply bears it. He pressed his forehead against the cool ground one last time. Nevertheless, the word came out quiet. Almost gentle. Not my will, but yours. He stayed there for a moment longer. Then he stood up. He came back to find them sleeping. Peter against the tree, head tilted back, mouth open, breathing with the slow depth of a man in a dream that has nothing to do with gardens or soldiers or cups that cannot be removed. James beside him. John curled in his cloak like a child. Jesus looked at them for a long moment. He had asked one thing. One thing only. Not to be protected. Not to be defended. Just to not be alone in the dark while he carried what he was carrying. Just company. Just 3 people awake beside him while he fought the hardest thing he had ever fought. He crouched beside Peter. Put a hand on his shoulder. Simon. The old name. The name from before. Peter startled awake, hand already reaching for his sword, eyes finding nothing to defend against. Then he saw Jesus's face. And the confusion drained out of him slowly, replaced by something worse, the full awareness of where he was and what he had done and how long he had been doing it. Could you not keep watch for 1 hour? Peter opened his mouth. Nothing came. There was nothing to say. His intentions were intact. His love was intact. Everything he had sworn at the table was still true. But here he was. Asleep. The spirit is willing, Jesus said. Not angry. Not even fully disappointed. Just honest. Honest about the gap between what we mean to be and what the body, heavy and human and subject to its own needs, actually manages. But the flesh is weak. He woke them a second time. A third. Each time the same. The third time he looked at their faces, the confusion clearing slowly, the weight of interrupted sleep, their eyes trying to find the shape of the night, and he didn't ask them to follow him back. He simply said, "Are you still sleeping?" Then his head turned. Through the trees. The sound arrived before the light footsteps, many of them, the particular rhythm of men moving with intention. Then the glow of torches between the branches. Then voices. Then the sound of metal. Jesus stood. The hour has come. Judas came first out of the dark. Peter knew that face. 3 years he had known that face across campfires, across shared meals, across the long dusty roads between every city they had walked through together. He knew the sound of that voice in the morning and the way those hands broke bread and the particular expression that crossed those features when something struck him as funny. His mind refused the truth of what his eyes were showing him. Then Judas walked to Jesus. Slowly. Deliberately. "Rabbi." He kissed him. Peter's sword was out before he decided to draw it. One motion. Steel catching torchlight. A cry. Something falling in the dust. And then Jesus's voice, cutting through everything. "Enough." Peter froze. Jesus crouched. Lifted what had fallen. And healed it. Even now. Even here. Even in this moment, with soldiers closing in and ropes already coming out, even now his hands were doing what his hands had always done. Peter stood with his useless sword and watched the soldiers close around his teacher and could not move, could not think, could not find a single action that made sense in a world that had just stopped making sense. He stepped back. Another step. And then he ran. Into the dark between the trees. Away from the torches. Away from what he had just watched happen. He would carry that running for the rest of his life. Would feel it in his chest every morning for years. Would hear a rooster at dawn and feel it all over again the moment his legs made a decision that his heart was still arguing against. But before the running, in the last second before he turned, he looked back. Jesus stood in the center of it all. Calm. Not the trembling man from the garden floor, the man whose hands shook and whose face held the weight of something too large for any one person to carry alone. That man was gone. What stood in the torchlight now was different. Whatever had happened in the dark between the trees, whatever had shifted in the third prayer, in the silence after "not my will but yours," it was holding. It was holding now. As the soldiers tied his hands. As they turned him toward Jerusalem. As the night moved on toward everything that was coming. Peter ran. Jesus walked. And the garden returned to the quiet it had before, the heavy, waiting quiet of a place where something enormous had just passed through and left its impression in the ground. The olive trees stood where they had always stood, the earth where he had prayed was still damp. And somewhere in the city, without knowing why, a rooster stirred in the dark. And waited for morning.